You're listening to the inaugural episode of Black Lodge Games podcast. In this episode, we're going to be introducing ourselves, talking a little bit about what the Black Lodge Games project is, how we came together, and what you can do to make your games better. And why all the current games out there suck balls.
You are not kidding on that, and that is going to be, I think, how we should start off this this inaugural episode, this brand new adventure into the gaming podcast scene. A little bit about how you and I both met. I am Nick Guidotti.
I'm Matt Pritchard.
My counterpart here, Matt Pritchard, absolutely. And how long have we known each other, Matt?
I think it's been probably like almost 9 years, because I think we met around the time that I started making videos on this channel, before my grand, 8-year hiatus or however long it was. But it's been a long time. And it doesn't always feel that way. But we met back in the day when a friend of ours released an RPG called Within the Ring of Fire, which you can see several sagas and of play of that game on this channel, should you choose to go back and look through the catalog. But there was, I think at the time, really what kind of kicked it off was there was this kind of community on YouTube that I think was called like the RPG YouTube Brigade or something like that.
That's
and there was
right.
a couple of like large gaming projects that were going on. But what it came down to was they ran kind of an online convention. I don't know if this, I know it happened at least twice. I'd be interested to go back and see if that actually continued. But I had an idea for a kind of near future science fiction game that I'd wanted to run for a while. And I just, allowed people, you sign up, you say, I'm running this game, and then people are just able to sign up. You don't really get to choose your players. So it was, I was a little worried that I might get some knuckleheads, but for the most part, I got some great players. And I remember when we got to your opening scene, we had never talked in person. We just communicated a little bit about like who's your character, very, very briefly,
just for this, this one shot, which is what it was billed.
It was exactly. It was just a one shot. This was not going to be a campaign. This is like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour movie, that's being made, and that's it.
Right.
And the second you opened your mouth in your opening scene, I was like, oh, thank God, this guy's good. Like the game's not going to suck. I was like, this is awesome.
and that's exactly what lit that fire. And that's a big reason, I think, that moment of recognition, more than anything else, of like minds is sort of what is bringing us here. Because like you said, at that time, there was kind of a renaissance happening in the gaming scene. Certainly online Google Hangouts was the medium of choice back when it was easier to do that on YouTube, and there were a lot of new faces, new voices coming to the hobby that were talking about, among other things, immersion, roleplay focused gaming, bringing that excitement, bringing that cinematic flair, bringing yourself away from the table, away from the top-down view of things, into that character. And that's really what we're trying to do here, and what I think, giving some examples of where we've been. Unfortunately, that scene kind of died down, along with a lot of things, with the adpocalypse. One of many
adpocalypses that happened, changes in the algorithm.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you're right. At the time, there was kind of this like nascent movement on YouTube with kind of like-minded gamers for people who are looking to get a little bit more out of their role-playing games than simply, sitting down and cracking some beers with your friends and cracking jokes the whole time. I think coincidentally, that was probably around the time that Critical Role started, which is the most successful D&D game of all time. Makes millions of dollars on Twitch every year. I think it was like $9 or $10 million a year, something like absurd.
Yeah. It's wild.
It's very wild. So, but at that same time, like you were saying, there was a lot of people who were starting to play online, and the kind of the complaint that all of us had was that finding games locally was very difficult, because you were limited by your geography and by your social circle of like who wanted to play, or
Very
you
much
had to
so.
do like the worst thing ever, which is just go jump into a game at a game shop with
Mhm.
whoever's there and whoever's running a game. And it was just like I've done that one time. I think it was the it was the day that they dropped fourth edition D&D, and everybody at that table hated the game. Like I think we had like a total party kill. Like we're like the rules were so like irritating and did not support
Yeah.
any sort of role play whatsoever. But yeah, people were coming online and starting these games like over Google Plus and Google Hangouts. And at the time, there were like plugins you could add to that that would like give you dice rolling, and like there was some kind of cool tools. I think it was also probably when Roll20 started becoming more popular as well. Um,
Yes, very much so.
but like with everything with the internet, it allowed a lot of these kind of disparate people to find each other on the internet and find kind of the gaming style that we were looking for, and are still unfortunately looking for, because it has not taken
Yes.
over. But that is, like you said, an immersive style. It's a game where you take things a little bit more seriously than simply like, oh, I can't wait to get my critical hits in and make jokes and make the DM
I'm going to
angry at
stack
how
these
I
feet.
broke his game.
I'm going to realize my character build.
Right,
I'm going to get that
exactly.
+4 bonus.
Yeah,
I'm going
exactly.
to acquire that magical item, not for its description, not for the story that it's told, but for the power and the DPS that it does.
Right.
Um, and yeah, at that time, it felt like there was a new resurgence, a desire to bring that forward. But unfortunately, like you said, like so many dreams
Yeah.
and so many internet fads, um, that scene has kind of died down, and with it, a lot of the focus and the drive, the motivation to bring an immersive style to the game, to the way that you play, to the way that you run as a GM,
Yeah.
uh, to even considering how systems interact with the world, with
Right.
the role play.
How they
Um,
support or hinder role play.
yes, and so unfortunately, while a lot of new voices have come forward, and a lot of, you mentioned Critical Role. There's 1,001 different clones of Critical Role,
Yeah.
and they all look exactly the same.
Yeah.
They all are very much exactly the same, trying to copy the success of Critical Role, but maybe they would have a chance of succeeding if they had any kind of passion or real focus beyond production value.
Right.
Um, Production value is great, but that's not what this hobby, this activity, from our perspective, is about at all.
Yeah, or I mean what
That's
it can
yes.
be. And so I mean I guess that's actually a good question to ask, is what do you mean when you're talking about an immersive style of role play versus a
Yeah,
non-immersive game?
yeah. It's one of these words like roleplay itself, which is used and bandied about by everybody, um, and yet it seems like every single person you ask, "What is roleplay? What is immersive roleplay? What is immersion itself?" You get you get a different answer. Um, from my perspective, immersion is looking at playing as role playing your character from that character's perspective as closely as you can, beyond the simple facts of the mechanics on the sheet. Try to actually envision yourself as a human or an elf or whatever it is you're doing, as a person in a world faced with these situations, and let the story and let your own actions flow accordingly from that. Are you a courageous person? Are you going to get involved? Are you more cowardly or more meek from a sheltered background? That's going to change drastically whether you and I, let's say, are both playing, to use a D&D term, both third level fighters, vastly different characters in really every sense of the word.
Yeah.
And when you don't look at it that way, you lose what is interesting, what's engaging.
Yeah.
And I think you had a good uh, uh, point in a conversation we had had previously about these moments
Yeah.
of immersion that happen no matter what kind of style. Um,
Yeah, it's like you almost, even if you have like if your game is the ultimate stereotype of a Dungeons and Dragons session, it's the Dr. Demento radio sketch where the guy's like, "Where's the Mountain Dew? If there's any chicks there, I want to do them." Even if you're having the like what I would consider like the lowest form of a role playing experience, you can't help but stumble across these moments in the game where you know you get engaged, and there's some sort of basically kind of like storytelling magic that happens. There's an example of this. I can't remember the guy's name. It's like Brennan something, but he's one of these guys who runs one of these very successful YouTube games. But it's a comedy game. But he had this discussion where he was talking about how he was running a game for newbies who had never played a role playing game in their life. And they befriend this character who's like a witch, and it's kind of like a fairy tale esque setting. This witch is very nice to them, and they have this wonderful experience. And they leave, and then a couple hours later in the game, when they come back, they find her body hanging from a tree, and the local villagers had basically like lynched this witch who was the source of their problems or whatever. And he said that all of his players got stone faced. They had just been cracking jokes and having fun, and they were like, we have to make them pay. And it's like those moments where people find the kind of like storytelling power of this hobby, you can't avoid them. They happen no matter what. And from our perspective, the fun of the game is not getting in and slaying monsters and getting treasure and being super badass. For me in particular, and I think you agree with this, is that moment of when you feel stone faced, when you are engrossed so much in that story that you kind of like lose yourself in this moment for just this brief span of time. That's the fun. Like that's the peak that you want to get to. And
yes.
so what we want is to have that moment as many times as we can in a single game and
Hmm.
keep the duration of that moment going. And so that kind of
Exactly.
it requires from your GM and your players to kind of take the game a little bit seriously. And I'm not against people, just sitting around and cracking jokes. If this is just like your way of like socializing, whatever, that's fine. Whatever. The problem is that is what is portrayed as this is role playing games. It's everybody sitting around and trying to get one
Yes.
over on the GM, and we're going to be as funny as possible, just like the people on Critical Role. They're making jokes. And it also helps if you're funny, by the way, to make jokes. If you're not funny, that's a big problem. But again, like I said, like that's like the lowest form of the experience for me. And the products that are made now and the YouTube content in particular that's made around Dungeons and Dragons and role playing games in
Yes.
general is all about that. It's about trying to dumb it down into the Dr. Demento sketch. And it's just frankly sickening to watch.
It really is. And not only is that the consensus, not only is that the portrayal of what the hobby is, what you should be doing and what you should be trying to shoot for, what you should be striving for as a GM or as a player, there's an increasingly not only antagonistic but vitriolic response to any kind of um, quality or any kind of striving, any kind of goal of doing more than just hanging around eating Doritos, you know, guzzling down your Mountain Dew with your friends around a table, not caring, rolling dice, forgetting the rules, forgetting your character.
Yeah. Oh man, that
Um,
pisses me off so much.
and it's terrible. It's terrible because this hobby could be so much more. This activity could and should be so much more fulfilling, so much
Yeah.
more exciting and engaging. Um, and it really is revolting. It really is insulting. Uh, the what would you say? The aggression, or the name calling, for those few people, and it seems fewer every day, who want to suggest, why don't you try? Why don't you try a little bit more for that? Wasn't that fun? Isn't that the memorable quality?
Right.
Isn't that the fun, quote unquote, that you should be trying to keep chasing, like you said? And that's what we hope to be discussing in this podcast, along with a number of other things.
Yeah.
Why that makes sense, how you can do it, what considerations you might take into account.
Right. I think that the entire kind of, I guess we can call this a project at the moment. The Black Lodge Games project is we essentially feel and know that we are on a mission from God to fix this hobby, not to deconstruct this in some sort of cynical way, but
Oh,
to reconstruct it from
this
its
is the
foundations.
reconstruction.
It is a reconstruction to to get these games to be what they always should have turned into and should have been and should be, which is an immersive storytelling, improvisational storytelling game, I guess. I mean, it is a game in a sense, but at the same time, like the for me, the big part of it is that you're telling these cool stories and you're coming up with them on the fly. And if you're in the moment, you know, it has a lot more impact. And because
Oh, yes.
if you can like get enough into character that you are invested in the stakes that you know whatever's going on in the game or with you know the particular storyline that your character is involved in, then your game is going to kind of soar to new heights and you're going to get those memorable moments. That's the thing is I have so many of these memorable moments from different games,
Yeah.
and some of the games were bad and some of them were great, were frankly like fantastic, but those are the things that have stuck out to me for over the course of like 25 years of doing this, and I want to continue to have those things. And it's really kind of unfortunate because like even look like we've been looking back at some of the older like D&D products, because like I have not played 5th edition. I probably won't, but I've been looking back at like AD&D 2nd edition, and even back then, like there's not any advice on how to roleplay in those books. It's literally
No.
just here's how you make a character. These are the rules for each class, and they kind of just left it up to everybody to figure out, you know, what was the point of the game. And
Hmm.
I think it's kind of a testament to, you know, people playing those games and who were really invested in like fantasy literature at the time that they did take it into the realm of storytelling. But it's not something that has really been pushed forward on a game level for a very long time. And that's not true of all games. Like you look at like the White Wolf games in particular. Like I'm a huge fan of Vampire the Masquerade and Requiem and
Hmm.
all of those games. Like those are more built towards the sort of immersive style that we know and love, that we spend our days trying to create. But the simple fact is, Dungeons and Dragons is role playing as far as most people are concerned. It is the hobby.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to that point, certainly the freedom that was more explicit in those earlier products, that is great. Um, and certainly preferable to a lot of what you see coming down the product pipeline these days from your major RPG publishing houses, Wizards of the Coast, to I guess a much lesser extent these days Paizo. Um, Really, those are the two big players, and I
Yeah.
don't even know what how Paizo ranks these days. But you know, to your point about the what this hobby could have and should have been, nothing is being put forth in that regard in terms of specific advice or talked about in the, what would you say, the dialogue
Hmm.
about these different products. And so I think explaining not only why but how is going to be a big portion of what certainly at the beginning we're going to be talking about here, and making it clear because it really hasn't been clear.
Yeah.
I alluded to at the beginning, everyone has a different definition of role play, it seems. Some people
Yeah.
might think just talking in so-called funny voices is role playing, just showing up is role playing, um, getting uh, familiarity with your mechanical aspects of your character, that's role play. These are all part of what role play is, but it's not really the focus. Um, those moments or those focuses aren't going to get you those moments as quickly or as often as you would otherwise like. And I think probably a good topic of conversation for the future will be maybe sharing some of those moments that you and I have had
Oh
in
yeah.
many, many different games. Um, that would be, I think, very helpful for a lot of people to um, explain
Oh yeah.
sort of where we're coming from here.
Absolutely. And I think also we've discussed this already, but we're also going to be putting our money where our mouth is and
Absolutely,
streaming raw. Well, I can't say this because this is our friend's brand name, but raw immersive games, for lack of a better turn of phrase
indeed,
there. Um, yeah. So I mean, we're gonna do that. We're gonna make some really awesome sagas and campaigns in various game lines. Got a lot of plans for those, which is super exciting.
absolutely.
Um, but yeah, I mean, like we're definitely going to talk about that sort of a thing. But um, I guess the kind of most interesting part of this was how kind of like gelled our own philosophies were on this when we were talking about it.
Yeah,
Because we like over the last year or so, we'd get on the phone, we'd talk for like 2-3 hours about this stuff, and
yeah.
sharing videos of the like monumental cringe.
Absolute state, the
Yeah,
absolute devastation.
yeah, the absolute state of the hobby, the sludge that is being pushed out. And it's really like fascinating to me because role playing is now like like socially acceptable. Like
Yeah,
it's basically like cool online in nerd culture, whereas previously it was like when I was playing this in high school, it was not cool. It was not
no.
cool at all. It did not win you lots of friends to be into Dungeons and Dragons or these other various games. And now it's it's almost like it's taken these incredibly low status like freaks and given them this social capital, which is
Yeah,
like very very bizarre to me that this has happened.
yes. And like you said, finding someone with a common uh, philosophy, a common worldview, or a common interest and focus on this hobby, which we are both incredibly passionate at or about because of this this dragon that we're both trying to keep chasing,
Mhm.
um, is so rare, and it can be very demoralizing.
Right.
Um,
And I would like to say to any of you out there who
yes,
like an immersive style, who are disgusted with the sludge that's being pumped out, you're not alone.
no,
And there are others out there that want those moments in those games, and we're going to help bring those.
yes, exactly. Because this, uh, that the quality that gold cannot be denied, and will come to the forefront very soon. Make no mistake about that. But yes, yeah, talking about the conversations we've had, especially over the like you said the last year, um, it really is an interesting kind of development because with the increase in number of voices and the gain of social popularity, the social capital that a lot of these low low status individuals and low status
Loathsome
efforts,
monsters.
loathsome fiends and monsters, to be sure, and make no mistake. Um, it's reduced the barrier of entry to such a degree that any voice that is the loudest or the most numerous, um, that defines the narrative.
And it
And
defines
that
what the direction of the market for,
the
who's.
market, the products,
Yeah.
what types of things are put forth, settings, publications, adventure modules, whatever the case may be. And you know, that model has been increasingly more uniform,
Yeah.
which is very unfortunate. You don't see, um, certainly not very many um, auteur or off the beaten path publications. And
No.
when you do, certainly they do happen. The rise of self publication is a great thing.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Um, but that is not what uh, receives recognition.
Yeah, and
Perhaps
I mean,
occasionally for a splash in the pan or a flavor of the month sort of thing.
yeah, I agree with that. And it's the difference is like I think that, the internet completely turns the publishing industry upside down, 15, 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And a lot of the business models that existed previously were like you and I could go to a bookstore and they would have a section with all the RPG games that were popular and then being played. It was a lot of D&D stuff, but you had all the games. Like you could get stuff for GURPS, anything that's made by like Palladium, White Wolf, like they were all there. You did have a lot of options, and there was seemingly some diversity there. Now that we have self-publishing, you do get like really interesting and weird projects. I've played some of them, and they're awesome. Like my two favorite games of the last 10 years have been these little indie projects. Um, they they exist and they're out there. They're extraordinarily niche, though. They're not sitting there next to D&D in the bookstore.
Right.
When you go on YouTube and you look up tabletop role-playing games, it's just Dungeons and Dragons. That's it.
Right.
It's like
Exclusively.
it's Hasbro, you know, and it's their product, and that's basically what people associate with the entire hobby now.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're not going to find these things in, 100,000 different publications on Drive Through RPG unless you already know about them.
Right. If you know to look
Um,
for it.
right. And so that's also a big part of what we're going to be trying to do is gain a louder voice in this uh, dialogue here. Perhaps converse with some other people who comment on the hobby in time if there is an interest in that.
Oh yeah.
Um, but or even showcasing certain these indie publications or even the larger. You mentioned Vampire the Requiem, Vampire Masquerade.
Yeah.
Um, how do these systems, these worlds, these products help or hinder that immersive style
Yeah.
of play here? Because there really have been a number of great publications. You mentioned a couple of your favorites. Um, one of my, I'm kind of awestruck by it. I haven't had an opportunity to really put it through its paces, but there's a French game which was translated into English via Kickstarter, I believe, several years ago by the name of Shadows of Esterin. I believe the name of the company is Agate Press. Um, that is a product which built every letter, every piece of art, the way in which the book itself is laid out is specifically tailored to evoke a very, very specific feel, a very specific tone, and a certain milieu and a particular genre um, that is certainly not your watered down high fantasy, so called.
Right.
Um, so that is, yeah, there is absolutely hope there for those who have an interest. or who have felt those moments occasionally at that table where you're all eating your Doritos and you're guzzling
Drinking your
your
Mountain
your beer,
Dew.
but
Yeah.
yeah, you need not just consume.
Right, exactly. Because that's the thing is that you can be better than that. You can, you know, play a more interesting game and be a more interesting player and a more interesting GM. And yeah, I definitely want to check. I remember thumbing through Shadows of Estrin and being like, this seems like right up my alley, but haven't
Yeah.
had a chance to play or run it yet.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, we keep talking about it. What are some of the what is role playing to you? I think I had given um a very brief sort of response to that inquiry towards the beginning of the episode, and
Hmm.
we're going to be dedicating certain episodes to the question because it's a huge question.
Yeah.
That yeah, there are certain topics in the tabletop community which continue to crop up again and again, year after year, and for good reason, because they're sort of fundamental questions
Yeah.
to anyone either coming into the hobby or rediscovering it or getting a different perspective. Even people perhaps joining a different gaming group and being exposed to different temperaments around the table or behind the GM screen, as the case may be. What is roleplay? How many videos have been put forth in the past 10 years that are basically dealing with that? Um, and frustratingly, there has not been, certainly to my satisfaction, a good answer. That question is always approached, it seems to me, and answered at an angle or obliquely.
Yeah. It's. I mean, it's a tough. It is a tough question to answer. So
Yes.
it's. I understand why the answers haven't really been that satisfying. And it's probably something that we're gonna have to talk about a lot on this podcast. But
Yes.
it's for me, role playing basically is like it is telling a collaborative story, and if you're a player, I guess from the perspective of the player, it is trying to create not even I'm not even gonna say convincing, but just an authentic character and
Mm,
being engaged as that character and actually using your imagination and trying to use your imagination to play that character and shape the story um, without needing reference to like fucking miniatures or any of these toys basically and I'm not against toys are cool but they don't they don't help me get into character. They don't help me realize this vision, this like really cool thing that's going on in my head, this flashing imagery that's happening when I'm playing a game. That doesn't come for me on a battle mat. That very much
no.
limits the scope of what I'm thinking about. So really, it is. I think it's about trying to have some sort of authenticity with it and some sort of um, just like I said earlier, taking it seriously and pretending to be someone else. That's what it comes down to. You are pretending to be someone else, but actually doing that, and it's a lot more fun to actually pretend and be in character than saying my character attacks the orc or my character says this. It's like just say it in the voice that you think your character would have, you
Yeah.
know, and have an actual conversation. It's almost like I see a lot of people like narrating like everything they're doing, as opposed to actually like playing it out. And to a certain
Right.
extent, you have to do that. You can't be like
Mm-hmm.
I stab someone in the gut with my sword. You can't really play that out unless of course you're going into the world of LARP, which we're not touching, uh, with a 10-foot boffer weapon. But
Yes. Yes.
um, but for me it's about being engaged and entering that world of imagination and taking it seriously and not being afraid to take it seriously and
Yeah. That's big.
it feels goofy and uncomfortable when you do it at first. And sometimes even when I start running a new game, every time it feels a little goofy at first. But that's the exact same way that I felt whenever I did plays or anything like that in the past. But you get through that, and then you get into a little bit of that authentic territory, and that's when like magic starts happening.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And you bring up a good and interesting point in referencing the miniatures, the battle mats, the
Mm-hmm.
other aspects, which are indeed part of the activity,
Oh yeah,
right?
and they're part of the DNA of the activity. Is
Right.
part of the
From
problem.
its war,
we need
yeah,
we need to have some
yeah,
eugenics on
yeah.
this and
We need
breed that out.
there's some we need to make some dominant genes
Yeah,
recessive real fast
yeah.
here. But you're right. The hobby came out of a wargaming background. Um, like you referenced at the beginning of the episode, not much forethought or explicit information as to what it would mean to take a different perspective from, your sort of invisible general commanding troops and battalions
Right.
on a tabletop to narrowing it down, taking it down more ground level to an individual in this scene, in this space that we're putting together. So a lot of that, to varying degrees, depending on the system, depending on the era of the game, have more of that. Um, and the connection with mechanics, imagination and mechanics, that's there's always going to be some kind of a, I don't want to say a contention, but there's going to be an interaction
Mm-hmm.
to some degree with those aspects. But frequently, you might hear someone say, "Well, I get enjoyment from the miniatures. I get enjoyment from my toys,
Yeah.
or from I like looking at the activity, or I like looking at my character from a tactical background, or I like narrating rather than getting into character."
Mm-hmm.
These are aspects of what some people might call role play, and these are aspects of playing in the game. But they are certainly with D&D as an example, fundamentally different activities that are being brought together under an umbrella, and that's
Yes.
called the role playing game. And so we think to ourselves, well, it's role playing game, and role playing games have this sort of mysterious, ephemeral definition called role play. I don't really know what it means, but I kind of have a vague understanding of what most people mean when they say it. There's attributes on my character sheet. I have hit points. If I'm playing D&D or a different system that uses them, I have miniatures and I have battle mats and I have mechanics for negotiating that kind of a terrain. But that's, from my perspective, a very different activity, and it's only artificially brought together. Those things don't have to be there. Yeah, it's like if you imagine playing a video game. I don't want to get into video games too much, but it's an
Mm-hmm.
apt example, I think. Um, a lot of people might remember these very evocative a cutscene or a moment of dialogue between two characters, and then you might have a quick time event where you have the actual mechanics of
Yeah.
play with your buttons and you're doing the tactics. They're two separate things. The enjoyment that you get and the flow that you're in, they're different things. And so I think there's kind of a false conjunction, or there's a false association that need not be there. And I think that's a huge part of the problem when people are trying to define what it is they consider quote unquote fun, or what they imagine when they're trying to um, define role play. They might think, well, I really do like role playing my character, but I also really like the tactical aspect, or I
Yeah.
like building my character. Fair enough. Um, but liking one thing or not liking another does not, it's not, they're not mutually, or they are mutually exclusive, I should say. Um, and I think the confused opinions to the contrary are a big part of why this whole topic is so ill-defined
Yeah.
and vague. I don't know what you think about that.
I actually, you said something that made me have kind of an interesting thought on um, people enjoying the tactical nature of it, and I was kind of thinking of like the people who they're like, I like narrating it. I'm kind of wondering, have you seen this thing where like apparently less than 50% of people out in the world have an inner monologue?
Yeah, I've heard that.
You've seen
Yes.
this, and like
Yes.
there's people who can't visualize things. Uh, like they can't. It's not even like the shape rotator meme. It's like they have trouble like envisioning something in
I
their mind,
can't
like holding
imagine
a
such a
picture.
hell.
I'm wondering if a lot of that is why some of these people
It might be.
like playing these mini games, because it's like they're literally NPCs. Like the lights are on but no one's
Yeah.
home. There
Lights
is
are
no
on, no one's home.
imaginative aspect, because I was just thinking about that. I was talking about the cool thing that's going on inside my head, and then I remembered, I was like, not everybody has that. Like, which is,
Yeah.
to me, that is a tragedy, and maybe that does explain some of this, the fascination with with the minis. But to your point, like I do think you're right. Like I don't think that there is necessarily conflict between having rules that adjudicate actions and these things, and you know the more imaginative part of role play. Because like I've tried some games that have like diceless mechanics, and I don't like diceless mechanics. They generally like it
Agreed.
I you need some level of kind of objective randomness to adjudicate disputes, but also like that adds in to the drama, because you don't know like if you're going to get some sort of like critical failure or like exceptional success on something.
Hmm.
It adds to the tension of what's going on, because it provides something that where there is this like unknown. So I don't think that I think in a lot of cases it can harm roleplay for sure if you have a rule system that is like totally simulation based. Get me
Yeah.
out of there. Like I would rather
Yeah.
unalive myself than because we're not going to use the YouTube unfriendly terms.
Yeah.
I'd rather do that than play in that game, because I hate that. But at the same time, I don't like totally completely freeform nonsense. And it's like the mechanics, like I think in a lot of games, like mechanics do kind of matter to whatever the setting and the game type and theme that you're playing in. They do kind of shape in a way. They put limitations and parameters on things,
Yeah.
and that's actually very good for creativity, I think. So I'm not one of these people that is totally against having against rules as such, but I do fall much farther on that side of the spectrum than liking the more simulation based stuff, because the kind of simulation based stuff, that is the early DNA of this hobby. It comes out of the wargaming, and Gygax and the others bring it down to the single character, but their rules for that are still like all of the supporting materials in the D&D games are like about movement and combat and the turns of
Right.
actions and how this happens. Like everyone has recommended to me read the Manual of the Planes. It's one of the great gems of the old Advanced Dungeons and Dragons books. And I opened it and I started flipping through it, and I was like, why are they talking about the gravity in this plane? Like, and then we were talking the other day, um, looking at old D&D settings on Wikipedia, and we looked at, like, I think it was Greyhawk. It's like the first one, and it's like Greyhawk was Gary Gygax's homebrew D&D campaign. It's the default world for D&D. The axial tilt of the planet of Greyhawk is 30
Yeah.
degrees, and it's like,
Oh my,
holy
peak
shit.
autism.
Yeah, like, oh
Yeah.
my god, I don't care. Like, this has nothing to do with what I want to
Yeah.
do in the game. Like,
Yeah.
why does that affect anything that I'm doing?
Right. It's crazy. It's crazy. And I think to bring it back to this notion of what is role play and what is it about and why do it, and it is a huge topic, and I think it bears it bears an episode at some point talking about breaking this down, because there's a number of ways to tackle it. Um, you have methods of role play. I talk in the third person. I talk in the first person. I ask questions, or I don't ask questions of the GM.
Hmm.
Some people feel very very strongly about Mother May I. What is the role of description? Which can't be first person in the description of your character or the description of a scene. Either if you're the player and have been given agency by the GM to take creative control, or if you are the GM. And certainly role play from a GM's perspective and a player's perspective is going to be very different,
Hmm.
because it doesn't manifest the same way, at least not how I understand it. I think you and I have
Yeah.
talked about this, but all those pieces of window dressing aside, I'll say, even for the purposes of this conversation, irrespective of what your preference is, or what you're most comfortable in terms of your narration, or in terms of how you're trying to make this moment happen for you, more than anything else, it's the intention. What am I
Yeah.
trying to do with this time that I have? 4 hours, 2 hours, hopefully not that short, but
Right.
you know, am I trying as best I can to get into that character's shoes and to be him or her?
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and I think that's the biggest difference between like the style of game that we like and what is presented as what is D&D online and role playing games more generally, is that I think most people look at this as like, oh, I'm gonna go have some fun with my friends, and it is very much implicitly just this kind of social get together. It's like playing board games. It's like playing
Yeah.
board games, but a little more specific. But it's gonna have a little bit of a story to it, and we're gonna kill monsters in this stuff. Whereas for me, I'm like, that's not what I'm there for. Like I'm there for
Right.
drama and storytelling, and you know, epic stories and epic stories of success and failure, rises and falls of empires, uh, you know,
Hmm.
romance and betrayal and death and all the things that we love in literature and movies that exists in this space in a unique way that you get to experience. You don't get to experience movies in the same way that you get to experience a role playing game, because in a role playing game you're in it. You are a participant. You are, you know, whether it's Jon Snow or Tywin Lannister,
Yeah.
you get to be that, and you get to direct what's going on with that character. And there's really nothing like it. Like when you get that immersive experience, you get hooked. And like I crave it, and I never ever want to go back to
Yeah.
this being
Can't go
just
back.
board. I can't go
Wouldn't
back to this just
wouldn't
being
and
board
couldn't.
game night. And I like board
Yeah.
games, but they're different things.
They're different things. Uh, you know, Tennis, volleyball, and ping pong are all games with fields of play,
Yeah.
nets, and spheres that you're trying to
Yeah.
pass throughout. They're very different games, very different activities. You know, no one would confuse, no one would confuse the three.
Exactly.
And that's, yeah. You bring up another. We're gonna have to dedicate an episode to it. You bring up a point, the topic, or the what would you say, the mantra, the catechism of the modern perception and ideology of the game.
Hmm.
We're just here to have fun.
Right.
Wrong.
Wrong. Yeah, you're
Absolutely wrong.
absolutely dead wrong. That's not why we're here.
This activity is not about getting together and just having fun and
Right.
switching your brain off. You bring up very compelling characters that countless people know about. spend way too much time thinking about.
Yeah.
But Jon Snow, Tywin Lannister, Game of Thrones, um, Gandalf, Lord of the
Right.
Rings. Pick your Star Wars, Luke Skywalker. Pick whatever it is, whatever genre. Johnny Silverhand. None of these people in those stories, in the shows, were having fun. If you're here to try and emulate that, uh, I want to be Jon Snow for my character. I want to be as
Hmm.
close. The experience of Jon Snow was a miserable existence.
Misery. Yeah.
Yeah. If you're playing a game like Wraith the Oblivion,
Hmm.
if you're doing it right, if you're doing it that is in keeping with the spirit of that genre and of that game, you're not having fun per se, not
Yeah.
in the
It's
way that it's colloquially defined.
not in the way it's colloquial defined. Exactly. It's that like the fun is that you get in the character and you get the drama out of it. Like I have fun watching movies. Like I love horror movies. I love dramas.
Right.
It's like think about watching like the like Boardwalk Empire. It was a fantastic show.
Amazing show.
That's not a fun show.
No.
It's a lot of people get hurt. There's a lot of really, really awful stuff that happens in that. It is entertaining. Like I enjoy watching it, but I'm not sitting there just
Mhm.
like, man, that was like such a fun game. Like that. It's like
Right.
I'm there because I'm getting to experience this drama, and vicariously through watching these characters, I get to experience the tension and the fear and the the release that these characters have when something good happens. Like it's because it brings those feelings internally for you. And in a role playing game, so that's fun watching it in that sense. That's what I want, and it's the same thing that I want from a role playing game because I'm getting to participate in that drama, and I'm getting to participate in the not knowing where this is going and
Right.
experiencing that tension, and that for me is the fun. And so it's not fun in in the way that it's presented online in all of this horseshit Dungeons and Dragons videos that are out
Yeah.
there that we will be bringing on and
We
we
will
will
be
be
bringing on.
dissecting and in full. It'll be like autopsies on these things.
Yeah.
I can't wait to do that, but
Yeah. A
that is not
slaughterhouse.
what the game is about. All right. You're doing it
Wrong. Yeah,
wrong. You are
exactly.
doing it wrong.
You are doing it wrong. There is a bad way to play.
Yes, there's a bad way
Uh,
to play, and you're cheating yourself out of something so much better
yeah.
than what you're doing. You're
Right.
cheating yourself out of
Exactly.
it because
Exactly.
you haven't tried at all. Because this is not even a topic that, for the most part, outside of certain games, certain game lines, none of this is at the forefront in the material for the consumer. It's all like, you can be an elf, and here are the different classes, and it's so boring. That was the
It's
other
so
thing that
boring.
like because I have been, like I said, I've never played fifth edition, but I was reading the fifth edition player's handbook, and I was reading the second edition player's handbook, and I was like, this is basically the same. Like the product has not evolved. Like I know like the rules are different. That like whatever, we're not dealing with THACOs anymore. We have ascending AC. Uh,
Right.
that's not what I'm talking about in the fact that like it
Yeah.
hasn't changed. It has not changed in the fact that it's still not about role playing.
Yeah.
It,
It's amazing that I think
they've been
I
around for
don't
like
I don't
50
remember.
years now. Like,
Yeah, it's crazy. Some CEO, I don't recall how to uh, I'll butcher it, but the spirit of the quote was something to the effect of um, there's no value in hiring someone who has 30 years of experience because there's no guarantee they just weren't fucking it up for 30 years. And
yeah.
that is the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's astonishing, truly.
Yeah.
But we are here to change that.
Right.
Uh,
Exactly. And we will be changing it.
yeah, we will be kicking and screaming, come hell or high water. The choice is not up to you.
Right.
But yeah, that's it's very telling. I have played fifth edition.
Hmm.
I played it for a fairly long campaign of Dragonlance.
Hmm.
And Dragonlance, I could talk for hours about Dragonlance. That's the D&D setting I know most. I read the books when I was in fifth or sixth grade. Um, Very fond memories of and a close affinity with that world. And that is a world very much more than any other, I would say, to my understanding of at least the core D&D settings, that has very firm demands, uh, and it was very evident almost immediately that the philosophy of fifth edition, which is written very plainly in the rules and in the way in which the game is presented,
Yeah.
that these things are not compatible in any way, shape, or form. I know Wizards of the Coast has a Dragonlance um, adventure or whatever right now, and they have stats or rules for your Knights of Solamnia, your Wizards of High Sorcery, etc., etc. It won't work. It won't work this um, in this milieu. You have to, as with all things, have limitations. Your point on creativity, mastery, fulfillment, excitement. Those things can only be achieved when you adhere to certain rules. It's not let's just get together and you know
Yeah.
switch our minds off.
Yeah.
You're going to have the excitement of a cow by doing that. If you really want to see what you're capable of in your games, uh, for your characters, in your groups, um, adhere to those, embrace those limitations. They're features, not bugs.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, we're coming up on an hour right now. We're at 58 minutes. You got anything that you want to say? Any parting words?
So many. I think we have a lot to say about this hobby, and a lot of it I feel, and I know you feel the same, that hasn't been said.
Yeah.
Um, you know, from our own uh, what would it be? Almost perhaps 30 years combined RPG experience, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We'll figure out the
Maybe
number.
more. Yeah.
Yeah. There is so much unexplored potential
Yeah.
about this wonderful activity. And if you are out there who are disenfranchised or disillusioned or frankly bored
Bored.
of
I know that has to be a big one.
everything is exactly the same. Every YouTube video, your five top tips for being a productive
8
GM,
things
how
bad
to deal with
DMs do. Yeah.
yeah, how to seven tips for dealing with problem players. Like there is so much more
Yeah.
than what you are seeing,
Yeah.
and
You
that
what
is our intention to show you those
to
things.
show you those things and help you get there, because I think that there's a
Yes.
lot of people out there who feel very similar to us who may not even be able to really articulate this. This might be just kind of this like they
Yeah.
know that there's something more to this, but they're they thought when they were going to getting into a D&D game, they had an expectation of what it was going to be. It was going to be this like magic experience, and they haven't gotten that. And the thing is, it's not that there's a problem with the game or your expectation. You had the wrong idea about what it is. It's that the games that you are playing in and the products that are largely responsible for attracting the sorts of players and shaping the sorts of players and GMs into what they are evil. And this is something that needs to be fought against. And what you wanted to get out of these games originally, it exists. It exists, and you can
Yes.
experience it. And probably one of the best ways to do that is to try and find like-minded players online because it's much easier to find them online than it is in person. But
Yeah.
the potential that you saw or that you thought when you saw that crazy box art on, like D&D sets or on any role-playing books, or even just, when you read fantasy novels, that potential can be realized. And it can be realized every single game. And we're going to get you
Every
there.
single game, regardless of genre,
Right.
regardless of setting, and we are going to be going through all of that. If you like fantasy, if you like sci-fi, if you like horror, if you like pulp,
Yeah.
um, there's something amazing to be found um,
In
under
everything.
every rock.
Yeah. So I think that's basically it. Do not give up hope. There is hope, and we're here to bring it for you.
Absolutely.
All right, man. It was great talking to you, and I will see you next week.
Later on.